I want you to picture something with me. It's a Tuesday afternoon, maybe 2 o'clock, and you're sitting in your favorite chair. Perhaps you're reading or watching something on television, or maybe you've just finished lunch and you're resting for a moment. The light is coming through the window at that particular angle it only reaches in the afternoon, and everything feels perfectly still. You're comfortable. Your body has settled into the cushions. There's no pain, no urgency, nothing calling you to move. And so you don't. 10 minutes pass, then 20, then an hour. And here's what I want to tell you, not as a warning, but as something I've learned after 4 decades of watching the human body age. In that stillness, something is quietly changing. Not dramatically, not painfully, but changing nonetheless. My name is Dr. Samuel, and I've spent more than 40 years in medicine, working primarily with adults in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. I've specialized in internal medicine, neurology, and the science of how our bodies change as we age. And one of the most important things I've come to understand, one of the insights that has shifted how I practice medicine entirely, is this: sitting is not the enemy. Movement deprivation is. Let me explain what I mean, because this distinction matters more than almost anything else I could tell you today. We've all heard the phrase, sitting is the new smoking. It's been repeated so often that it's become almost meaningless, a kind of background noise in the conversation about health. And like many oversimplifications, it misses the point entirely. Sitting itself is not dangerous. Your body is designed to sit, to rest, to be still. The problem isn't the position, the problem is the duration. The problem is what happens inside your body when that position remains unchanged for too long, and what happens is far more specific, far more treatable, and far more within your control than most people realize. I want to walk you through this carefully because understanding the mechanism is what allows you to change it, and I promise you the changes required are smaller and gentler than you think. Let's start with circulation, because this is where the cascade begins. When you sit down, your leg muscles stop contracting. This seems obvious, almost too simple to mention, but bear with me because the implications are profound. Your leg muscles, particularly your calves, act as a kind of auxiliary pump for your cardiovascular system. When you walk, when you stand, when you shift your weight, these muscles contract and release in a rhythmic pattern. Each contraction squeezes the veins in your legs, pushing blood upward against gravity, back toward your heart. This is called the skeletal muscle pump, and it's one of the most elegant systems in human physiology. But when you sit for extended periods, this pump stops working. The blood in your legs begins to pool, the pressure in your veins increases, and your heart, which is already working harder as we age, has to compensate for the loss of this auxiliary support. Now, a 2021 study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology examined exactly this phenomenon in adults over 65. Researchers measured blood flow velocity in the femoral artery, the major vessel that supplies blood to your legs, during prolonged sitting. What they found was striking. After just 30 minutes of uninterrupted sitting, blood flow velocity decreased by an average of 42%. 42%. Not over hours, but within the first half hour. And here's what makes this particularly relevant for older adults. That decrease in blood flow doesn't just affect your legs, it affects the entire circulatory system. When blood pools in your lower extremities, your heart receives less blood with each beat. Cardiac output decreases, and because your brain, your kidneys, your liver, every organ in your body depends on consistent blood flow, they all begin to function slightly less efficiently. It's not catastrophic, it's not a medical emergency, but it's happening, silently, every time we remain seated for too long. But circulation is only the beginning. Let me tell you about something called metabolic signaling, because this is where the story gets even more interesting. Your muscles are not just mechanical structures, they're endocrine organs. When they contract, they release signaling molecules called myokines into your bloodstream. These molecules communicate with other tissues throughout your body. They tell your pancreas how to regulate insulin, they tell your liver how to process glucose, they tell your bones to maintain their density, They even communicate with your brain, influencing neuroplasticity and cognitive function. This is not speculation. This is well-established science. A comprehensive review in Frontiers in Physiology in 2022 documented over 30 different myokines and their systemic effects on aging adults. But here's the critical point. These signals are released primarily during muscle contraction. When your muscles are still, when you're sitting for prolonged periods, this communication diminishes. Your metabolic system begins to drift. Insulin sensitivity decreases. Glucose regulation becomes less precise. And over time, over months and years of this pattern, the risk of metabolic dysfunction increases substantially. I want to pause here and address something directly because I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking, I'm too old for this to matter. Or I have arthritis, I can't exercise like I used to. Or perhaps, I'm already doing the best I can. And I want to tell you with all the conviction I can muster that this is not about exercise in the traditional sense. This is not about going to a gym. This is not about running or lifting weights or any activity that requires intensity or endurance. What I'm describing is something far simpler and far more accessible. I'm talking about interrupting stillness. I'm talking about gentle, brief movements performed frequently throughout the day. And the research on this is absolutely clear. These small interruptions are more metabolically powerful than a single extended exercise session. A landmark study from the University of Leicester, published in Diabetes Care in 2023, compared two groups of adults over 60. One group performed 30 minutes of moderate exercise each morning, then remained sedentary for the rest of the day. The second group performed no formal exercise, but stood up and moved gently for 2 minutes every 30 minutes throughout their waking hours. The researchers measured various metabolic markers, blood glucose, insulin response, triglycerides, inflammatory markers, and the results surprised even them. The frequent movement group showed better metabolic outcomes across nearly every measure, not slightly better, significantly better. Their blood glucose levels were more stable, their insulin sensitivity was higher, their inflammatory markers were lower. The conclusion was unmistakable. Frequency of movement matters more than intensity or duration when it comes to metabolic health in older adults. Now let me turn to something that affects every single person as we age: balance and proprioception. Your sense of balance is not a single system. It's an integration of multiple inputs: your inner ear, your vision, and critically, the sensory receptors in your muscles and joints called proprioceptors. These receptors constantly send information to your brain about where your body is in space. They tell you whether your weight is forward or back, whether you're leaning, whether your foot is flat on the ground or tilted, and like every system in your body, they require stimulation to remain calibrated. When you sit for long periods, these receptors receive almost no input. Your brain stops getting feedback about balance and spatial orientation, and gradually, imperceptibly, your balance system becomes less responsive. You've probably experienced this yourself. You stand up after sitting for a long time, and for just a moment you feel slightly unsteady. That's not weakness. That's your balance system recalibrating after a period of sensory deprivation. Research from the Journal of Gerontology in 2020 tracked fall risk in community-dwelling older adults over a 2-year period. What they found was that time spent in uninterrupted sitting was a better predictor of fall risk than overall sedentary time. Let me repeat that because it's counterintuitive. It wasn't how much total time people spent sitting that mattered most. It was how long they sat without moving. Someone who sat for 8 hours but took frequent short breaks had better balance outcomes than someone who sat for 6 hours in long, uninterrupted blocks. The difference was proprioceptive stimulation. The difference was giving the balance system regular inputs to work with. And then there's the brain. I spent 15 years specializing in neurology before broadening into general geriatrics, and one thing I've learned is that the brain and the body are not separate entities. They're a unified system. Your brain depends on movement, not just for blood flow, though that matters enormously, but for neurochemical balance. When you move, even gently, Your brain releases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. This is a protein that supports the survival of existing neurons and encourages the growth of new ones. It's essential for memory, learning, and cognitive flexibility. A fascinating study from Neurology in 2019 examined older adults with mild cognitive impairment and found that those who interrupted their sitting time with light activity every hour maintained higher levels of BDNF and showed slower cognitive decline over 18 months compared to those with similar total activity levels but longer periods of uninterrupted sitting. Your brain also needs consistent oxygen delivery, and this is where circulation loops back into the story. When blood flow decreases during prolonged sitting, cerebral blood flow decreases as well. Not enough to cause immediate symptoms, but enough to affect cognitive performance. Studies using functional MRI have shown that sustained sitting reduces blood flow to the hippocampus, the region critical for memory formation. And here's what gives me hope. What makes me optimistic every time I share this information: these changes are reversible. When you stand up, when you walk for even 60 seconds, blood flow rebounds. Your brain receives a fresh delivery of oxygen and glucose. The proprioceptors in your legs and spine wake up. Your muscles release their signaling molecules. Your entire system resets. So what does this mean practically? What am I actually suggesting you do? I'm suggesting that you set a quiet intention to interrupt your sitting every 30 to 40 minutes, not with exercise, not with anything strenuous or complicated. Just stand up, walk to the window and back, march in place for 30 seconds, shift your weight from foot to foot, raise your arms overhead and stretch gently. The specific movement matters less than the act of interrupting the stillness. You're not trying to elevate your heart rate or build strength, though those things have their place. You're trying to remind your body that it's a dynamic system, not a static one. You're re-engaging the muscle pump. You're stimulating proprioceptors. You're releasing myokines. You're delivering fresh blood to your brain. I know this might sound too simple to be meaningful. We've been conditioned to believe that health interventions must be difficult, must require discipline and effort and sacrifice. But sometimes the most powerful interventions are the gentlest ones. Sometimes what the body needs is not intensity but consistency, not heroic effort but patient repetition. Think of it this way: your nervous system is constantly listening. It's listening to the signals your body sends. And when those signals say stillness, stillness, stillness for hours on end, your nervous system adapts to stillness. It becomes calibrated for immobility. But when the signals say stillness, movement, stillness, movement, throughout the day, your nervous system maintains its readiness for action. It stays responsive. It stays alive. I've seen this play out in my practice more times than I can count. I've had patients in their 70s who came to me complaining of stiffness, fatigue, a sense that their body was betraying them. And when we talked through their typical day, a pattern emerged. They were active in the morning, perhaps taking a walk or doing some light exercise, and then they'd settle in for the afternoon and evening, sitting for 2, 3, 4 hours at a stretch. On paper, they were meeting activity guidelines, but in practice, their bodies were spending most of the day in metabolic hibernation. And when we introduced this simple change, this practice of frequent gentle interruption, the difference was often remarkable, not overnight, not miraculously. But steadily, over weeks and months, they reported feeling more energetic, more stable on their feet, clearer in their thinking. One patient, a woman named Margaret who was 73, told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "I feel like my body remembers how to be a body again." And I think that's exactly right. Your body hasn't forgotten. It's just been waiting for the signal to re-engage. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are simply responding quite logically to the conditions you've created, and you have the power to change those conditions. Let me be clear about something else. I'm not suggesting that traditional exercise isn't important. It is. Strength training, cardiovascular activity, flexibility work, all of these have their place in healthy aging. But they cannot compensate for prolonged, uninterrupted sitting. You cannot exercise your way out of a sedentary lifestyle any more than you can out-exercise a poor diet. The body doesn't work that way. The body responds to patterns, to the accumulated effect of what you do hour after hour, day after day. And if what you do most of the time is remain still, then no amount of morning exercise will fully override that signal. This is why I want you to shift your thinking about movement. Stop seeing it as a discrete activity, something you do and then cross off a list. Start seeing it as a way of living, a rhythm you maintain throughout the day. It's not an obligation, it's not a chore, it's a conversation with your nervous system. Every time you stand, every time you walk, every time you shift and stretch, you're telling your body, I'm here, I'm present, I'm alive. And your body responds. It always responds. I often think about the long arc of a human life, the slow accumulation of choices that determines whether our later years are marked by vitality or decline. And what I've come to understand is that independence, true functional independence, is built on hundreds of small daily actions. It's built on maintaining circulation and metabolic flexibility and balance and cognitive clarity. It's built on staying in conversation with your body, keeping the lines of communication open. And that communication happens through movement. Gentle, frequent, unglamorous movement. The kind that doesn't make for dramatic before and after photos, but changes everything nonetheless. So here's what I'd like you to do, if you're willing. For the next week, simply notice. Notice how long you sit without moving. Notice how your body feels when you've been still for an hour. Notice the slight stiffness when you first stand, the moment of recalibration. You don't have to change anything yet. Just notice. Bring awareness to the pattern. And then when you're ready, start experimenting with interruption. Set a gentle reminder if that helps. Stand during phone calls. Walk to another room and back between chapters of your book. Stretch during commercials. The specifics don't matter. What matters is breaking the continuity of stillness. And I want you to know as you embark on this that you're working with your body, not against it. You're not punishing yourself for being sedentary. You're not trying to reverse years of habits through sheer willpower. You're simply reestablishing a rhythm that your body remembers, a rhythm that feels, once you settle into it, completely natural. Because it is natural. Movement is your birthright. It's how you're designed. And it's available to you right now exactly as you are. I've dedicated my career to understanding aging, and if there's one thing I want people to know, it's that decline is not inevitable. Frailty is not inevitable. Loss of independence is not inevitable. What's inevitable is change. But the direction of that change, the trajectory of your later years, is more influenced by these small daily patterns than by almost anything else. You have more agency than you think, more power than you've been told. And it doesn't require transformation. It requires attention. It requires gentleness. It requires treating your body not as a machine that's breaking down, but as a living system that's trying, always trying, to maintain its balance and function and vitality. Help it, work with it, move with it, and watch what becomes possible.
This video contains health-related information created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. If you believe you may have a medical concern, we recommend consulting a qualified medical professional.